The courtroom was filled with an air of uneasy silence, every person holding their breath as the judge's gavel struck the bench. The sound echoed, loud and unforgiving, but nothing could prepare them for the shock that followed. Michael Hayes, a man once on trial for a heinous crime, stood up suddenly, breaking the oppressive quiet with a simple phrase that shattered everything. "I confess," he said, his voice raw and uncertain, yet definitive. The words hung in the air, thick and heavy, leaving the room frozen in disbelief. The prosecutor, who had spent years building a case, stared at him with wide eyes, his mouth agape. The defense attorney, caught off guard, gripped the edge of his table, his face pale as he struggled to comprehend the gravity of the moment. The jury looked between each other, their eyes filled with confusion and unease. Michael's confession was not the expected conclusion. It was a betrayal of everything they had thought they knew. The truth had been concealed for so long, buried beneath lies and uncertainty. But now it was out in the open. What did it mean? Who else was involved? What had driven Michael to this point? His body trembled slightly, and for the first time, the full weight of his guilt seemed to hit him. But the confession was only the beginning. His next words would twist the knife deeper. "I didn't do it alone," he whispered, almost as if trying to take it back. But it was too late. The room erupted in chaos, the tension building to a fever pitch, as the air turned electric with the realization that nothing would ever be the same again. The shock of Michael's confession reverberated through the room like a physical blow, but his next words only deepened the mystery. "I didn't do it alone," he added softly, almost in a whisper, as if regretting his confession. Those simple words sent a ripple of unease throughout the room. The prosecutor, his mind racing, snapped, "What do you mean? Who else is involved?" But Michael said nothing more. His face, pale and drained of emotion, looked distant, as if his mind was somewhere far away. The defense attorney leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He had no idea what Michael meant. Had the confession been part of a larger plan? Or was this a desperate attempt to muddy the waters? The jury sat frozen, eyes darting between the defense, prosecution, and the man who had just unraveled the entire case. The air was thick with anticipation, but still, Michael remained silent. The truth was there, just out of reach, like a piece of a puzzle missing its final piece. Who was the other person? What could Michael be hiding? The prosecutor's voice, now colder and more insistent, broke the silence. "Who else was with you?" But Michael gave no answer. His lips were sealed, his head bowed. Whatever secrets he held, they were not ready to be revealed. The tension in the room was unbearable. The prosecutor's voice, now demanding, echoed through the courtroom. "You can't just leave us hanging like this." His frustration was palpable, his voice rising as he looked directly at Michael. But the defendant only stared ahead, lost in his thoughts. The defense attorney's brows furrowed as he exchanged a glance with his client, wondering if he had somehow misjudged the situation. The jury, equally confused, shifted in their seats. The judge, sensing the growing storm, called for order, but no one was listening. Michael's confession had set off a chain reaction, but it seemed there were still many unanswered questions. What had happened that night? Who had been with Michael? What role did they play in the crime? The truth seemed so close, yet so far away. The prosecutor's voice came again, sharp and cutting. "If you know something, now is the time to speak." But Michael remained silent, his lips pressed together tightly, as if whatever he knew was too dangerous to share. Courtroom waited, held hostage by his silence. In that moment, everything felt suspended in time. The weight of the silence stretched on, unbearable and thick. Michael's eyes flickered to the judge, a man who had seen countless cases unfold, but never one like this. The judge leaned forward slightly, his fingers interlaced, studying the man before him. "You have one chance, Mr. Hayes. One chance to explain yourself." The words hung in the air, a final ultimatum. The room was on edge, every person holding their breath, waiting for Michael to speak. His lips parted, but no words came. The prosecutor, impatient and desperate for answers, barked out, "Who else was involved, Michael? Who else was there? The cold steel in his voice contrasted with the growing heat of the moment. The defense attorney remained silent, his hands clasped tightly, unsure how to guide Michael through this. The jury's eyes shifted uneasily, waiting for the confession to be completed, for the missing piece of the puzzle to fall into place. Michael's face was ashen, his gaze unfocused. The weight of his past, the hidden secrets, all seemed to pull him further down into himself. Then, finally, his voice, barely audible, broke through the tension. I can't tell you. Not yet." It was a gut-wrenching admission, one that carried both fear and resolve. The room seemed to collectively exhale, the tension thickening as they waited for the next move, the next revelation. Michael had just set the stage for something darker, more dangerous. But the real question was, why? The gavel struck again, a sharp and commanding sound that filled the room with a new level of finality. The judge, his voice calm but firm, declared, "We will adjourn for the day. Mr. Hayes, you will have to answer the court's questions at a later time." The words fell like a heavy weight, leaving everyone in suspense. As the room began to clear, Michael remained seated, unmoving, his eyes glued to the floor. His mind was racing, but his body refused to move. What had he started? What had he let loose by speaking the truth, even in part? The prosecutor exchanged words with the defense attorney, their voices low but intense, as if plotting their next steps. Outside the courtroom, the storm had only intensified, the rain lashing against the windows with ferocity. But inside, it was as if a calm had settled, an ominous calm. Michael had confessed, but it wasn't enough. The air was thick with unanswered questions, and his silence was now a weapon. No one knew exactly what would happen next, but one thing was certain: whatever had been hidden in the dark was now on the verge of spilling into the light. As Michael stood, his legs shaking slightly, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the glass wall beside him. He looked like a stranger. The man he had been was gone, and in his place stood someone trapped by his own choices, by his own confessions. He had opened a door, and it would never be able to close again. The next morning, Michael sat alone in his small, dimly lit cell, the cold stone walls pressing in around him. The weight of his confession still lingered in the air, like the stench of something foul that couldn't be erased. He could still hear the echo of the gavel in his mind, the deafening silence that followed his words. His heart raced with a sense of dread that never seemed to leave him. His attorney had not arrived yet, and the time seemed to crawl by in slow motion. The rest of the world outside this prison was beyond his reach, a blur of noise and light that had no bearing on his reality anymore. He had confessed, but why did it feel like the beginning of something darker? He wasn't sure if he could take back what he'd done, but that wasn't the real problem. The problem was that he couldn't control what was coming next. The truth, it seemed, had its own momentum now, and it was unstoppable. Michael's fingers ran over the rough edge of the metal bed frame, his knuckles white with the tension. There was no going back. The door to his cell creaked open, and his defense attorney stepped in, his face grim. "We need to talk," he said softly. Michael looked up, his eyes hollow, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." His attorney's eyes darkened. "You may have just made everything worse." Michael sat up straighter as his attorney spoke, the tension in the air palpable. "You've made a dangerous move, Michael. The prosecution won't stop until they've broken you. And right now, you've given them all the ammunition they need." The words cut through the air, each one heavier than the last. Michael wanted to respond, to argue that he had done what was right, but the sinking feeling in his gut told him otherwise. He had admitted to something he didn't fully understand, and now he was tangled in a web of lies, half-truths, and shadows. His attorney continued, his voice low and cautious. "You need to trust me. We can still work with what we have, but we need you to stay quiet. No more confessions, no more surprises." Michael felt a wave of panic rise within him. He had already said too much, revealed too much. What about the other person? The one I said was involved? Michael's voice cracked, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. The attorney's eyes narrowed, his gaze sharp. "Don't mention it again. Not until we know exactly what we're dealing with." But Michael's mind raced. He couldn't forget that voice, that face, that person who had been there with him. His confession had been just the start, but the real truth still had yet to surface. Michael paced the small confines of his cell, his mind spinning with fragments of memories and half-formed thoughts. He couldn't stop thinking about that night, about what had really happened, and why it felt like everything was slipping through his fingers. The confession had been a mistake, but now there was no undoing it. He couldn't even remember if he was being truthful anymore. The walls of the prison seemed to close in around him, the narrow space amplifying his sense of entrapment. The air was thick with the smell of stale food and sweat. The distant sound of clanking chains and muffled voices in the hallway did little to comfort him. He was alone now, truly alone. The only person he could trust, the one person who could help him, was his attorney. And even that relationship felt fragile. What had he started? The doubts gnawed at him. He had said too much. The past was now something to fear, to regret. But there was no turning back. Then, a soft knock on the door pulled him from his spiraling thoughts. The attorney had returned. Michael's pulse quickened. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what was coming next, but he knew it was inevitable. The attorney stepped into the cell, the door closing behind him with a soft click. His eyes were sharp, his expression unreadable. Michael stood still, waiting for him to speak, but when the attorney did, his words were blunt. "We've received new information." Michael's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of information?" he asked, his voice shaking despite his best efforts to stay calm. The attorney leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "It's about the other person you mentioned. We believe they're connected to a much larger operation than we thought. We don't know how deep it goes, but it's serious." Michael's mind raced. He had always suspected there was more to the story, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. His confession, his words, had they set something much darker in motion? His attorney continued, "We need to be careful how we handle this. If we move too quickly, we risk being caught in the crossfire." Michael swallowed hard. "What do we do now?" His attorney's face hardened. "We wait. For now, silence is your best option." Days passed in a blur of anxiety and confusion. Michael sat in his cell, staring blankly at the concrete wall before him. The weight of the decision to remain silent was beginning to eat at him, the pressure building with each passing hour. His attorney's words echoed in his mind, "Silence is your best option." But Michael wasn't sure how much longer he could stay silent. The uncertainty gnawed at him, and the thoughts of the other person, the one he had implicated, lingered like a dark shadow. Was it guilt that held him back, or fear of the unknown? What if staying quiet only made things worse? His hands clenched into fists, the frustration building. He couldn't let this secret fester. He couldn't let it destroy him. And yet, every time he thought about speaking, something held him back. Fear of what might come next. Fear of losing control. The door to his cell opened again, but this time it wasn't his attorney. Instead, a familiar face appeared in the doorway, someone from his past, someone he hadn't expected to see again. Michael's heart raced as the figure stepped into the cell, their presence casting an eerie silence into the room. The day after the unexpected visitor, Michael was still reeling. He hadn't expected to see anyone from his past in this place, let alone someone who had known him before the case even started. The visitor, standing in the doorway with a stern face, had been a ghost. His name was Nathan Brooks, a man from Michael's earlier years, someone he thought he would never see again. The old memories flooded back, ones Michael had tried to bury. Nathan had been part of a much darker chapter of Michael's life, a chapter full of lies, deceit, and danger. But what Nathan had said next made Michael's blood run cold. "You've made a mistake," he'd whispered, his voice grave, "and it's bigger than you think." Michael had tried to push him away, tried to ignore the sense of dread settling in his stomach, but Nathan's words stuck with him. Now, as he sat alone in his cell, Michael wondered how much more of his past would come back to haunt him. Was it all connected? Had his past finally caught up with him? The attorney had warned him to stay silent, but something told Michael he couldn't remain in the dark any longer. He had already opened a door, and now it felt like there was no way to close it again. Was Nathan right? Was the mistake Michael had made just the beginning? The next day, Michael's attorney arrived, his expression grim, his steps quick and purposeful. There was no time to waste. "We need to talk," he said, his voice sharp. Michael barely had time to react before the attorney continued. "The prosecution's been digging deeper. They're starting to suspect that your confession was only the tip of the iceberg." Michael's stomach churned as the reality of his situation sank in further. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. The attorney sat across from him, his hands steepled in front of him, his eyes locked on Michael's. "It means you're not just a pawn in this game anymore, Michael. You're the target. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want, and right now they want you to crack." Michael felt a wave of panic rise in his chest. His confession had already turned his world upside down, but now the pieces of the puzzle were shifting. What was the prosecution after? What did they know that Michael didn't? His mind raced with the possibility that the truth was more complicated than he had ever imagined. "We need to prepare," the attorney said softly, but Michael felt the weight of the words like a stone pressing down on his chest. The next few hours were a blur of strategizing and questioning. Michael felt like a pawn in a game he didn't understand, each move uncertain, each step bringing him closer to a place he couldn't escape. The attorney had been blunt. "We need to find out who else is involved before they do." Michael's mind raced. Who could he trust? The people from his past were like ghosts, shadows of memories that had long been buried. He had already opened a door by confessing, but now it felt like the door had been forced wide open. What if they already know? Michael asked, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The attorney's response was chilling. "Then it's already too late. But we need to move fast. If we don't, the walls will close in on you." Michael felt the floor beneath him shift, the ground no longer solid. He had thought his confession was the key to everything, the truth that would set him free. But now, it seemed like the truth was a cage, one that was closing in on him, tightening with every passing second. His options were running out. Every choice now seemed like a step closer to ruin. He couldn't afford to make another mistake. The phone call came late that evening, just as Michael was drifting into an uneasy sleep. His attorney's voice was low, urgent. "We've got a lead," he said. "A name. Someone who might be able to help us connect the dots." Michael's heart skipped a beat. "Who is it?" he asked, sitting up on the edge of his bed, his pulse quickening. The attorney paused before responding, his voice even more grave. "It's someone from your past, someone you once trusted, someone you once trusted, someone you should have never let go." The name sent a chill down Michael's spine. His mind raced back to a time before all of this, a time when things were simpler, when he didn't know the weight of what he was about to uncover. The attorney continued, "We need to find them, Michael. They know more than they've let on, and if they're still involved, they're the missing piece of this puzzle." Michael felt a mixture of dread and curiosity. What had he missed? What had he overlooked in his desperate attempt to bury the past? His thoughts swirled as he tried to imagine what this could mean. But the attorney's next words were the ones that really hit home. "Well, don't have much time." The next morning, Michael couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. He sat at the small table in his cell, his mind racing with the new information. And all were allied. A name. Someone from his past. Could they really hold the key to everything? He wasn't sure what to think anymore. The past had always seemed like a distant memory, something he could escape from. But now, it felt like the past was closing in on him, suffocating him. The door to his cell opened, and his attorney stepped in, a determined look on his face. "We've located them," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's time to act. We'll get the truth, one way or another." Michael stood up, his legs unsteady. What if it's too late? He asked, his voice filled with doubt. The attorney's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. It's never too late, but we have to move fast. Michael took a deep breath, the weight of the situation pressing on him. This was the moment. There was no turning back. Michael sat across from his attorney in a dimly lit interview room, the sterile air thick with tension. A folder lay between them, its contents sealed but radiating a sense of urgency. The attorney's voice was low and deliberate. We've confirmed the location of the person from your past, he said. Michael's stomach tightened. Where? His attorney hesitated, eyes locked on him. A safe house. Out in the industrial district. They've been hiding for months. Michael's hands clenched into fists under the table. The thought of seeing them again filled him with dread. This was the person who could either clear his name or destroy it entirely. We need to decide now, the attorney continued. Do we confront them or let the prosecution get there first? Michael's pulse quickened. The choice felt like a trap. Every possible path seemed to end in ruin. But he knew inaction was worse. We go, Michael said finally, the words tasting like steel. The attorney nodded slowly, already planning the next move. The folder between them seemed to grow heavier, as if it contained not just paper, but the weight of the truth itself. The drive to the industrial district was silent, save for the hum of the engine. The rain had returned, streaking the windshield with rivulets that distorted the view outside. Michael sat in the back seat, watching the city fade into abandoned warehouses and rusting fences. The attorney sat beside him, speaking occasionally into his phone in hushed tones. Michael's thoughts raced. Every bump in the road seemed to jar loose another memory of the person they were about to meet. Betrayal. Lies. Promises broken. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the car roof like a warning. We're almost there, the driver announced, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. Michael's chest tightened. He wasn't sure if he was ready to face what awaited inside that safe house. But there was no turning back. Not now. The safe house stood at the end of a narrow, unlit street, its exterior a crumbling facade of weathered brick and boarded windows. Michael stepped out of the car, the wet pavement reflecting the faint glow of a distant street lamp. His attorney motioned for him to stay close. The air was heavy with the smell of rain and rust. Each step toward the building seemed to echo louder than the last. Michael could feel the tension in his muscles, every instinct telling him to turn back. But he pressed forward. They reached the door, paint peeling, hinges rusted. The attorney knocked twice, then paused, then knocked again. Silence. Michael's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Finally, a faint shuffling came from inside. The door creaked open a fraction, revealing a shadowed face. Michael recognized them instantly. The figure behind the door stepped back, allowing them inside. The safe house smelled of dust, old wood, and stale air. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a weak circle of light over a small table. The person, tall, lean, with sharp eyes, looked at Michael as if sizing him up. You shouldn't have come here, they said, their voice flat but edged with tension. Michael swallowed hard. We need answers, he replied. The attorney stood between them, a silent buffer. The figure's gaze shifted to the attorney. If you're here, it means they're close. And if they're close, it's already too late. Michael's pulse spiked. The words landed like a hammer blow, a grim warning that confirmed his fears. This wasn't just about his case anymore. This was about survival. The conversation grew heated. Michael demanded to know why they had been hiding, why their name had come up in his case. The figure leaned forward, hands flat on the table. "'Cause if I'm found, we both die," they said coldly. Michael's breath caught in his throat. "Who's after you?" The figure's lips curled into a bitter smile. "The same people who want you." Silence. The attorney broke in, his tone sharp. "We don't have time for cryptic answers. We need facts." The figure's expression hardened. "Facts will get you killed." The room fell into a tense silence, the air thick with unspoken truths. Somewhere outside, A car door slammed. All three froze. In that moment, Michael knew they were no longer in control of the situation. The slam of the car door outside jolted everyone in the safe house. Michael's eyes darted to the window, his breath hitching. The tall figure across from him went rigid, their gaze hardening into something lethal. The attorney's voice cut through the tension, sharp and commanding. "We need to move. Now." The figure grabbed a small duffel from the corner, the zipper clinking in the silence. Michael's pulse thundered in his ears. "Who is it?" he demanded. The figure didn't answer, only gave him a look that told him everything. Whoever was outside wasn't here to talk. The footsteps on the gravel grew louder, closer. The old floorboards creaked as the figure moved toward the back door. "We have less than a minute," they said coldly. Michael hesitated, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. This was no longer about the trial or the truth, it was about survival. The back door groaned as they slipped outside into the cold night. Rain plastered Michael's hair to his forehead, the scent of wet asphalt thick in the air. The alley stretched out behind the safe house, narrow and shadowed, with only a few flickering lights in the distance. "Stay low," the attorney whispered. They moved quickly, feet splashing through shallow puddles. Every sound felt magnified, the scrape of shoes, the distant hum of a car engine, the faint metallic click of a weapon being readied. Michael's breath came in sharp bursts, the adrenaline making every movement feel both urgent and sluggish. Behind them, a door slammed, followed by rapid footsteps. "They're here!" the figure hissed. The attorney's hand tightened on Michael's arm, pulling him faster into the maze of the industrial backstreets. They reached a chain-link fence at the alley's end. The figure tossed the duffel over before climbing swiftly, the metal rattling under their weight. Michael hesitated, his eyes darting back toward the shadows behind them. A silhouette emerged at the far end of the alley, tall, purposeful, and closing the distance fast. "Michael!" the attorney barked, snapping him out of his frozen state. He grabbed the cold steel and began climbing, the wet metal biting into his palm. The figure on the other side urged him on. As his feet hit the ground, a muffled shout echoed behind him, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots pounding against the wet asphalt. They were seconds away from being caught. On the other side of the fence they broke into a sprint. The industrial district stretched ahead, rows of corrugated metal warehouses, their windows dark. The air was thick with the smell of oil and rust. "This way," the figure commanded, darting toward a side street. Michael's lungs burned, every breath tearing through him. The attorney stayed close, glancing over his shoulder at the pursuing shadows. A sharp crack split the night, gunfire. The sound ricocheted off the metal walls, sending a spike of terror through Michael's chest. They dove behind a stack of wooden pallets, the rain pounding harder now, masking the sound of their quickened breathing. For a moment, they were hidden, but not safe. The figure leaned close to Michael, voice barely audible over the rain. "If they find us, they'll kill us all. But if we move now, we can lose them." Michael's hands shook as he nodded. The attorney gave a quick glance toward the street, then whispered, "On my mark." They waited for the sound of the pursuer's footsteps to shift, then burst from cover, weaving between rusted machinery and abandoned crates. The darkness became their ally, swallowing them as they moved deeper into the labyrinth of the district. Michael's chest ached, but he pushed forward, each step taking him farther from the safe house and deeper into the unknown. Behind them, voices shouted in frustration, just far enough to mean they'd bought themselves time. But not safety. They didn't stop running until the industrial district thinned into an overgrown rail yard. The night air smelled of rust, wet earth, and danger. Michael bent over, gasping, but the tall figure pulled him upright. "Don't stop," they hissed. The attorney scanned the shadows, his jaw tight. The tracks stretched endlessly in both directions, glistening under the faint orange glow of a distant street lamp. "We're exposed here," the attorney muttered. Michael's pulse thudded in his ears. He wanted to ask how much further, but the sharp echo of footsteps behind them cut through the rain. The figure's eyes narrowed. "We've been herded here. It's a trap." Michael's stomach dropped. The attorney's hand slipped inside his coat, searching for something. "Then we break it," he said. The rain pattered harder, masking the sound of whatever was closing in. The footsteps grew louder, more deliberate. Michael's eyes darted toward a line of derelict freight cars. The tall figure pointed toward them without speaking, and they moved quickly, boots splashing through puddles. The attorney kept looking over his shoulder, his pace deliberate but urgent. As they reached the first rusted car, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the tracks. Michael ducked instinctively, heart hammering. A voice called out from the shadows, deep and commanding, "You can't run forever." The sound chilled him. The tall figure pressed a finger to their lips, motioning them to keep moving along the row of freight cars. Every step felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. They slipped between two freight cars, the narrow gap forcing them into single file. The rain dripped from the metal above, steady and cold. Michael could hear the pursuers fanning out, their boots crunching on wet gravel. The attorney whispered, "They're pushing us toward the east end." The tall figure's voice was grim. "Exactly where they want us." Michael's breath came faster, the claustrophobic space amplifying his panic. Then he saw it, beyond the gap, the faint glow of headlights, stationary and waiting. "We can't go that way," he blurted. The figure stopped, turned to him, and for the first time, Michael saw fear in their eyes. "Then we make our own exit," they said, pulling a small crowbar from the duffel. The figure wedged the crowbar into the side panel of the freight car, the metal groaning in protest. Michael kept glancing over his shoulder, the distant voices and crunch of gravel drawing nearer. The attorney crouched low, scanning the darkness for movement. With one final heave, the panel gave way, revealing a pitch-black interior that smelled of rust and damp wood. "Inside," the figure ordered. Michael hesitated only a second before climbing in, the cold metal biting into his palms. The attorney followed, pulling the panel back into place, just as the beam of a flashlight passed over where they had stood. Silence inside, save for the sound of rain tapping the steel above. The darkness swallowed them whole. Inside the freight car, the air was damp and heavy, each breath tasting of rust. Michael crouched low, his eyes straining to adjust to the dark. The attorney sat opposite him, listening intently to the sounds outside. The footsteps passed, slow and methodical, pausing every few seconds. The tall figure remained near the panel, their body rigid. Then, without warning, the footsteps stopped entirely. Michael's heart thudded painfully. A voice, close now, murmured, "Found you." Light exploded through a small crack in the wall, slicing across Michael's face. The attorney's hand went to his coat, but the tall figure shook their head sharply. "Not yet," they whispered. The danger was no longer outside, it was here, pressing in on all sides. A voice outside the freight car was slow, deliberate. Michael's skin prickled. The tall figure leaned close. "If we go out, we die." The attorney's hand stayed in his coat. A boot scraped metal. A distant train horn echoed, time was nearly gone. The figure shoved the duffel into Michael's hands. "Run when I say." Before he could answer, they slipped out. Voices shouted, then a gunshot. The attorney yanked Michael toward the opening. "No!" Rain hit hard as they bolted into the night. They sprinted through the yard, weaving between hulking freight cars. A searchlight swept across, blinding them. "Keep going," the attorney yelled. Michael's chest burned. The duffel grew heavier, like it carried more than secrets. At the fence's end, the attorney found a sagging section. Michael shoved the duffel through and crawled under, mud soaking his hands. Figures closed in. The attorney hauled him upright. "Move!" They emerged onto a narrow, empty road, under a flickering street lamp. The pursuit was fading, but Michael knew it wasn't over. As they disappeared into the rain, he realized this was just a bigger cage.